Okay, we're going 5, 4, 3, 2. Sam, welcome and thank you for being here. Nice to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
I say that, but I should say, notwithstanding there's a Yankees jersey over your, I guess, left shoulder. We're gonna overlook that because we couldn't blur it out.
Many of our Boston employees are not happy with that in the background either.
Well, they don't. There's no love lost for them here in Toronto either. But I will say, and then we'll get onto it. But now you can actually have a beard and play for the Yankees. So maybe your days of playing aren't over.
There you go. That is Don Mattingly. The first, he had the whole big thing with his mustache. So
yeah,
it's definitely been in the press in the 80s.
We'll give you a pass on the Yankees jersey if we can talk about cannabis today. How's that?
Deal.
I will say, though, the one ascend that I drive by the most is near my parents' house. It's right off the Mass Pike in Newton. And it's a great location. One, because you could see it from the Mass Pike, but also because it's near Trader Joe's. It's a great location. And maybe we'll actually start there about that location, but maybe broaden it out to your other locations. Like, what does the footprint look like? And is there, like, the specifications you look for when citing a site? Like, what are those? What are you looking for when you cite sort of locations?
Well, I think that's been one of our core strengths historically, is that location on Main and Main, high density areas, high household incomes, near other retail. So it's a thoroughfare. It's great when it has visibility off of a highway, and most importantly has parking. You need to make it extremely convenient for customers to come to your store as part of their daily routine or shopping routine, where they don't have to go out of their way. In the early days of AU, it didn't actually matter as much where your locations were. In a lot of the biggest stores, actually, on a revenue basis, were not well located. But when you're competing against very few stores, the location, like, people are going to find where you are. What we're finding is, as it becomes more competitive, it is all about location, because you need to be part of that routine. Whether it's a shopping routine, the daily routine on the way home from work or to work, it needs to be convenient for the consumer to find you. And we're finding that to be a huge differentiator for us long term. And so the stores that we've cited directly have all been in locations that we view as core retail markets that we look at. And so we have a little bit of a secret sauce, but the high level were the points that I said. The key is that Main and Main, you have to have parking so they can come in and out. The bad parking doesn't work. And then once you get them in the store, you got to do a good job of keeping that customer. That's the harder part.
And you've been expanding, obviously. It's not just one market, it's many. Talk about the footprint overall, because talk about the footprint, and then we'll get sort of at the specifics of those.
Sure. We have 40 stores across 7 markets. We're in Illinois, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio.
It's pretty good. You just had them rattled off like that. Or do you have them like tattooed on your hand so you can remember all the time?
I literally think of the map, and I'm just like I'm going different orders each time. And that one was kind of weird. I went back across, but because I skipped Ohio by accident, actually. So you're calling me out on my mistake.
Well, I was thinking that you actually were doing them in order where you opened, which I think was going to be really impressive if you did it sort of sequentially. But actually, I want to talk about the last one, Ohio, because it's, I think, the newest in terms of markets opening up. And are there differences between, or even within markets, that that others wouldn't even think about, that you're like, you know what, we look at the data, we see what's happening, northern part of the state, southern part of the state, eastern Mass, western Mass, like, are there things that you think about that sort of pop when you're looking at data from across these, or is it like every market very similar, products, all those things?
No, every market is extremely different. The consumer is different. The competition's different. And what is popular in one market might not be popular in another. Mature markets also. So it's also like, how long have you been adult use? Like, so Michigan is a totally different world than, say, New Jersey. Because of, like, as a market evolves, so the consumer gets smarter. They know more about weed. They understand the differences. They're more refined, if you will. But also, as time goes on, efficiencies are met, and you have more competition, and so then you just have prices come down as well. So then those prices, when they come down, also have an effect on what the portfolio looks like in terms of what's popular and what isn't. And if I took it a step further, it's also when were the capital markets open, when that market flipped, because that ultimately decides, like, okay, did that get built out a little too much because there was so much access to capital at that time, versus something that opened up later where perhaps the capital markets were closed and then people couldn't afford to build a ton of facilities. And so it's a tighter market from a supply demand dynamic.
Yeah, it's like I'm thinking about like a whole, not even a spreadsheet, but like a wall of charts about like time to open, capital markets, number of stores within a 5-mile radius, like all those things you have to think about when you're opening a store, but then in an ongoing way, because now there's more stores down the street, there's more products on shelves, consumers are more savvy, the neighboring state went legal, like all these things must factor in. And like, do you see it? Like, do you see it in the data when Ohio opens up? Does it affect Michigan? Like, have you seen those things like push and pull consumer demand across either state lines or within a state based on other openings?
Yeah, I mean, when you had early openings, there was like cannabis adult use was not really available. So there was a lot of cannabis tourism. So anytime people went through the state, they made sure to load up because they didn't have it in their own state. It wasn't accessible in their own states. So as more states have flipped, you have a lot less cannabis tourism. Colorado is probably the perfect example of a state that depended heavily on that cannabis tourism. And as it's become more commonplace, people they don't think about Colorado as a place where I have to load up before I leave. So that's definitely changed. For Ohio, it's interesting because Ohio is one of the later flips. It has the neighboring states that, have flipped already. So, on either side, but to the south, it's, still like, Indiana, Kentucky have not. So it's an interesting sort of, and Pennsylvania is where it's very easy to get a card. So you're not going to pull too much from there. But it's interesting to see because it's also a state that has, it had a very, like I would say small like medical market relative to others. And when it flipped, I think the expectations were extremely high given the size of the state. You have almost 12 million people. So people were like, okay, this should be easily like Illinois in a few years. And they looked at the Illinois numbers, tried to apply it to Ohio. And unfortunately just Illinois flipped when the neighboring states were, relatively early state or didn't have anything. And so I think it was just a completely different dynamic than what Ohio did because Ohio's got a lot of competition on its borders. And so they opened into a different world and you're not gonna get any cannabis tourism, obviously. So, it had to win on its own merits. But it also they didn't have the legislature didn't allow for advertising, for example. So we haven't seen a state where you had a flip and you couldn't advertise. Right. So this is the first time. So how do customers know where we are? Right. So unless you're on Main and you're right on a highway and it's obvious. By the way, you have to be very careful about even the signage. Right. So even if you're on a highway, it can't say the word cannabis on it. Right. So you have to be very careful. And we have a big blue building, for example, in Cincinnati. So kind of stands out. It doesn't you don't necessarily know what it is, but at least we stand out. We pop. If you know, officially advertising because we can't. We got to follow the rules. But in other stores that we couldn't paint it a color and it wasn't in a location that was right on the highway, it's a little tougher. And you could be open and you could have customers that are like a mile away and just don't happen to notice it. They drive by it every day. So that has definitely hurt the growth in that market. We've been fortunate. We've had more than a 3x in that market. I think the market itself is a little less than a 2 or roughly a 2, something like that. But it's kind of stagnated since AU, and that's been disappointing because what we've always seen is this linear build after the flip, And I don't think the state has really shown a real linear build that you've seen in other states. So we'll see what happens when they open it up. They allow for advertising. I think that would be significant. And form factors. We're not allowed to sell things like pre-rolls, which is a pretty big segment for most markets. And then if you're near the Michigan border, it's very tough to compete on price.
Right. And they advertise like crazy. Like it's
they have billboards on the highway in Ohio. That's okay. But if we put a billboard, we'll get fined and maybe even shut down. So it makes it even tougher. It's like they've set up their constituents or their the local players to play at a disadvantage, and it's a little frustrating.
Yeah. But it's interesting because you would think that each successive states will learn from the state before them, but every state views themselves, I think, as they're like unique animals, and they want to implement in a way that is unique to them. Some similarities, but really, Michigan and Ohio, they're cousin states, if you will. So, Sam, you think about all these different markets are operating sort of little countries, as you said, or independent countries. But are there brands, and I know you've launched a brand called Effin, which I just love, and I want to know if I love it because I'm from Massachusetts and that's how we talk, or is it because like it is a good brand, the product, the quality, all of those things that's hitting the market, and you expand beyond that? Like, is that something you could bring to every market and launch in store?
Yeah, it's something that's been extremely successful across markets. I think because it's, with flower, I think it becomes a little more, you have to have some knowledge and experience. And that is more almost like the wine market. I think with edibles in particular, that is like most people, like at the beginning, like the first thing they'll try is an edible. And it's intimidating because you don't really know what you're going to get and what is the effect of, or what is that experience going to look like? And, people have had like sativa, indica, in a hybrid or whatever, but it doesn't really, if you're a novice, it doesn't really tell you what kind of experience you're going to have. But further, if you look at other non-cannabis markets, people are looking for very specific experiences or expectations from anything that they're drinking or eating. Poppy is they just went for almost $2 billion just because they have probiotics in their drinks and people like them and they're low calorie, and it's like so people are looking for more just more out of whatever it is that they're buying. And so when you take minor cannabinoids and you add them to the edibles, it creates a more interesting experience and a specific experience that people are generally looking for. So we started out just being very simple of like things that people would want to do, whether it's like the obvious one is sleep. That's been very popular in general, but also like, chill or hang or do it. So we're trying to hit like the different types of things that you might be in the mood to do when you have a cannabis experience. And it really hit the mark. And it's the first brand that we've really built as a brand, like where we actually had a CPG mindset to launching it. It wasn't just filling a particular set of biomass that we were putting out of a facility. And we're just like, okay, let's put this in this package. This was something that was thought out. It actually has like an ethos behind it and like a real vision and target customer and target like experience. So like we're really thought about it before launching the brand. It's the first time we've done it that way, and we're going to do more of that in the future, where the innovation side of our business is going to be hyper focused on looking at what's around the corner. How can we be a leader in these markets rather than a follower, which we've been historically. And this is just an example. And because of its success, there are more effects. There are more things that people are looking for. Maybe there's some crossover and we have to, choose one or the other, but ultimately we're going to have more than just a handful of effects that people want. And we want to hit the right notes so the consumers come into our stores and they're very excited about, knowing exactly what they're going to get when they try our products.
Yeah, so that's innovation on the sort of product side, and we'll post some images for sure about sort of FN Edibles, and if you want to check it out, fnedibles.com is actually the website. But I want to talk about retail innovation, I guess. I don't know, outlets, I guess, are retail innovation in cannabis, but talk about sort of the outlet model that you have. I don't know if it's in every state you operate in, but what is the outlet? How does that differ from sort of Ascend's normal stores?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, outlets and other like non-cannabis retail are pretty common, and they don't work in every market. It's not necessarily something that we are looking to do, but in certain markets, it makes a lot of sense to be that market leader on price, and give a great value to customers. And the reason it works well for us is we only do it in the states where we have like a core cultivation, advantage of some sort. And so we want to take advantage of the volume output of that facility. And this helps us increase the volume, which ultimately lowers the cost of the fixed cost assets. And so it's a great way for us to benefit along with the consumer. And the way we look at it is like, if we were forced to sell that volume at wholesale versus selling that volume at retail, even though it's at a lower price point, ultimately the contribution margin from that retail location, even at that lower price point, is significantly greater than the wholesale alternative. So it just makes a lot of sense in those states where we, number one, have the capabilities, but also in the markets where that's going to be a differentiating factor. So we don't have that many of them. We have a handful, but in the places that we choose, we're very thoughtful about like, how are we going to play? How are we going to compete in a more competitive situation? And that's how we make those decisions and place our chips. But the wholesale, the outlet model does not work everywhere, and we would never place it everywhere. It's very strategically focused, and it really is about that driving capacity, driving volume to lower prices, and then giving something to the consumer so they benefit too. Like at the end of the day, that's who we're serving. And every single decision we make in our company is about the consumer.
Sam, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us here today, notwithstanding the Don Mattingly jersey. Next time we're going to make you
Blur
do
it
this
out
from a different background. Yeah, we're gonna blot it out in the final product. Sam, I appreciate the time, and we look forward to connect with you later this year.
Absolutely. Pleasure. Thanks, Jay.